Today we're in Cambridge visiting the Fitzwilliam Museum, and Cambridge is a great city for museums. Over the next few weeks we'll be covering the other museums we visited, so watch out for the Zoology Museum, the Scott Polar Institute, the Scientific Instrument Museum and the Grant Wild Museum. Unfortunately, the Archaeology Museum was closed, but as you can see here, you're not short of archaeology at the Fitzwilliam. We're actually starting downstairs by the toilet. There is a grand entrance and you can leave a bag when you come in. Staff are very helpful. It's a beautiful museum. Reminds me a lot of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, which is actually the oldest museum in Britain. And certainly a very good collection here of archaeology from Egypt, Greece, the Levant, Rome. And we come round into the main galleries. There's some very interesting pieces, like here is an original chair which has been substantially repaired, and you can see it with some additions, along with some beautiful statues and grave goods from various burials. Interesting collection of really throughout the Middle East. Here in the corridor, some very interesting Indo-European burial goods, combs, tools, pots. And there's very good explanations on the walls. The maps with the locations of the finds, the extents of the various empires and cultures involved. And it tries to cover a very broad area. So here you can see from the Arabian Peninsula there, stuff which you wouldn't often see in a museum. Quite often British museums are a little obsessed with Egypt, Rome and Greece. But certainly an interesting collection. And round into some Buddhist heads and statuettes. That's where we came in, or at least started. Now through to the Greek area. The Greek area really is excellent. There's a couple of rooms with a large number of masks, figures, statuettes. Some of them have been recreated, but they're displayed with the original statuette. And also, if you look at the ceiling, it's such a beautiful museum. It has the historic grandeur that older museums have. Quite often you go to a more modern museum and they're quite sterile and they concentrate only on the item. And you could argue it distracts, but at the same time I do love a classic museum where the building is seen as a part of the whole fabric. Here, beautiful Greek vases, and also very good explanation of actually how they're made. So how that black and orange, that sort of umber effect was achieved on vases. I think probably the best explanation I've seen in a museum. Along with, I hate to use the word eclectic, I think I use it too often here, but really an eclectic collection of Grecian art, culture, antiquity, beautiful busts of various philosophers and rulers, and very interesting pieces really. Along with here are burials, sarcophagus. A lot of pottery. You have to remember this museum harkens back to the time where we didn't have carbon dating, and a lot of the dating of digs and finds was actually based on Petrie's system of looking at the pots and saying, well, this is a beaker people, this is ancient Greece, this is medieval, this is Roman, this is Saxon. And it was a a broad but fairly accurate description of the items from the find itself. This is really beautiful. I believe it's Greek, but it may be Roman. Unfortunately, the video is probably not clear enough to tell. And it's a beautiful burial sarcophagus. It's effectively a stone coffin, really detailed carving around it. And here you have these 4 masks and mask helmets, and these are helmets of warriors from various parts of ancient Greece, and there's a very good explanation of the differences and really beautifully preserved. These are originals, these aren't fakes or copies. I mean, I don't want to call out particular museums, but sometimes you go to a museum and you see a wonderful piece, maybe from Mycenae, let's say, and then you find out it's actually very heavily recreated. But these are all originals, unless the original is in situ and next to it is a modern copy of what it used to look like. Along with here some beautiful wall carvings, and there's a very nice mosaic from a Roman garden further along that we'll see in a second. Beautifully inscribed slab with ancient Greek. It's really display cabinet after display cabinet of really beautiful pieces of work, and very well displayed. And some of them are out close. You might remember the Chinese vase that was smashed a few years ago by a visitor slipping into it. And that's actually at this museum. It's on display upstairs. Hopefully we'll see it in a little while. And then through to later Greek wares. Really all types of vases, vessels, bowls, food storage, liquid storage, food. Maybe some of them aren't the most exciting, but they're certainly beautiful pieces, along with decorative pieces, statuettes, gods, figures, masks. A very interesting collection. I remember coming here as a teenager and being quite impressed with it. And I would say, if you like this museum, the Ashmolean is almost like its unofficial twin. The two are very similar in terms of the quality and breadth and depth of the historic artifacts on display. One thing where this museum, I would say, is a little bit ahead of the Ashmolean in terms of its collection is the pottery section we're visiting in a second. It's certainly a very extensive collection. They have about 3 or 4 rooms of pottery on display. There's a lot of old English ware from Worcestershire, Gloucestershire, some of the Staffordshire potters there. Quite good examples of wares from Derbyshire, and they're grouped together by the historic era in which they came along. A lot of this section here is kind of pre-fine bone porcelain, and there is in a minute a beautiful copy of the Portland vase made by Wedgwood, and there's not many you see. Hopefully you've watched our video on the Wedgwood collection of the V&A. Here is French and German, a lot of ware from particularly Meissen, Dresden, Limoges, and probably in Europe there were 3 areas that really produced wares of a high quality, and they're all very well represented here. And here is an original, oh, we just turned the wrong way, but on the left hand side is the Portland vase. Now actually there's a very good example at the Wedgwood Centre, but it's behind glass and you don't get to see it quite as well as you do here. Although this is glass, it's very naturally lit, whereas the example you see in Wedgwood Visitor Centre, it's now World of Wedgwood, is behind a more reflective glass with quite a lot of lighting in a dull room, and it's hard to see it as clearly. This took years for Wedgwood to work out exactly how he was going to produce such a masterpiece as a copy of what the Greeks and Romans had been able to do 2,000 years earlier. There was a lot of these figurines, not to everyone's taste. I think they've long been forgotten. I still remember when you'd go to Debenhams and there would be Coalport ladies, and they do still exist, and frankly they're a lot higher quality than these, but these are much older and these are their precursors. I won't hang around too much strolling through these, but it's a very interesting collection of 18th 19th century pottery from around Europe. You see Victoria's bust there and various statuettes of nude ladies riding animals. I think this is tied to the Albert Memorial and the personification of various continents by the animals themselves. If you go there, you'll see the 4 statues on the corner representing Europe, Asia, the Americas, and Africa. I'm going to skirt fairly quickly through the rest of the pottery. Some interesting majolica ware, and it shows the evolution of that as an art form from slip being placed on, slip's liquid clay, being laid on to create a 3D effect, to colours and different glazes being used. Through in this room there's some very interesting more naive, the earlier examples of earthenware mixed clay designs. And you see there the owl reminds me a lot of a museum that we'll have to visit in the future, the Potteries Museum and Art Gallery, where one of their most prized exhibits is a giant owl in that design, which is, I don't know, probably 4 foot high. It's often on their fridge magnets and postcards, one of the most prized items. But here you see some very interesting examples of pottery from around Europe. These remind me a lot of what you see in Florence, in the shop corners. The very basic primary colour painting. It's a style you see a lot in Tuscany. And these are very much of an era, probably 17th, 18th century. Certainly that lived a bit older before pottery moved on substantially in terms of the quality of manufacture. And some beautiful jasper wares here. Really gives a nice example of the finer, more refined forms of pottery that were around, and really after Josiah Wedgwood. I mean, that's actually why I went to the World of Wedgwood, the V&A Wedgwood collection, because he was a very important figure in the evolution of pottery as an art form. And there you see the white plate, the creamware. You see those, but it evolves into these. Within half a generation, you had the green and cream effect, and you have beautiful examples of the strawberries where they're raised, or the cauliflower series there. And you'll sometimes see them in an antique shop or a charity shop. You have to be a little careful of what the colour, the tone of the green is. The later ones are slightly richer green, and really it shows you that it's a 20th century piece that's probably worth £1. Sadly, I'd say none of the pottery's worth what it used to be. Here's some beautiful examples of sort of exhibition quality jasperware and really beautiful pieces. And then moving on to the next display cabinet, after these lovely jasperwares, you see there's figurines from the sort of 18th century, 19th century, where there was less detail in the colour and the glazing, but they were a very popular decoration. And this survived through, you see Shakespeare up at the top there, you see Lustre wares down at the bottom, and some very good examples here. Some sort of Victoriana, very militaristic, nationalistic, a bit proud of themselves, and the figurines carried that through, along with some lovely examples of Chinese wares. A very good collection of Chinese, because really it's very important when looking at pottery in the 18th, 19th century to understand that China was centuries ahead of Britain in terms of the quality of their pottery. We were producing very plain, functional earthenwares, and China was producing these beautiful, elegant, fragile, but the sort of thing you put on a table for a dinner party. And Britain just didn't have that. It had the everyday ware. And it was people like Wedgwood, Staffordshire Potteries, Royal Derby, and Royal Worcester, various pottery manufacturers, which worked out the formula to kind of catch up, and really then stood on the shoulder of the works you see here, where Asian pottery really was the very best for centuries. And here's an interesting display cabinet of Korean wares, and through in the other room there, I think we go in there in a second, there's a lot of very austere Asian pottery. And over to the side there is the shop and cafe, and there's also a lovely exhibit we'll get to in a bit of some arms and armour. Here, very beautiful Japanese, Chinese, Korean, very high quality pottery for its time. And it's not very common you see it. Really, I can't think of a museum in Britain that has Korean pottery. I'm not sure I'd visit a museum for it, but I certainly found it quite interesting. I do have an appreciation of better pottery, better quality. This is very simple blue and white designs that probably influenced the willow pattern. A lot of people, their grannies would have a willow pattern plate. Now we're moving into one of my other favourite historical periods, ancient Egypt, and there's some beautiful shrines, figures, very good examples here. It was a little crowded, this room, particularly there was a bunch of school kids from a local school going around. I was trying to avoid getting them in the film. So you'll see here some beautiful examples of cartouche there, some wall carvings, some paintings, figurines, very interesting chin and mouth there, which immediately makes me think of the Amarna period, where there was an attenuation and exaggeration of facial features. Here, sarcophagus. This is a partial sarcophagus, so it's been completed with a filling material, but you can see the remaining pieces. It really is beautiful. And various grave goods, gods. These are actually roof tiles or wall tiles. There's the little blue pieces, kind of lapis lazuli colour. They would be placed almost like plates of armour. And there's a very beautiful sarcophagus here, which probably didn't really do justice to the level of detail on it. It's a very hard granite, and although it's a fairly rough surface, it has beautiful detailing in it. And here, a series of Egyptian mummy coffins. So you have the outer coffin, So they'd be wrapped up, mummified, then they go inside one layer, then almost like a Russian doll with different layers of boxes shaped like the body, turning into boxes that were square, turning into larger square boxes and or rectangular. It's a very good collection for a smallish museum. I mean, it's by no means small museum, but it's not a massive museum. It's one you can probably do in a couple of hours and see everything. Now you see the ibis, lovely little pieces from a tomb, containers for fluids and liquids. You had to be buried with everything. If you were a scribe or a lower official, you probably got a few grave goods. But if you were a pharaoh or a noble, you got buried with an eternity's worth of materials and equipment. See, they're a really beautiful example. Now, obviously, if you like these, go to the British Museum on the first floor. You'll see room after room of beautiful mummies and coffins. Over there, some interesting figurines. If you were an Egyptian pharaoh, you got a full-size boat to sail off to the afterworld. But if you were a lesser person, you'd get a little model, the shabtis and the various sort of figurines representing people would provide those services. Yeah, really very nice little collection of items, really, all sorts of Egyptian related, and not trying to just display the grand pieces. In the corner there you've got a pot, which was a pot burial from the early era in Egypt before they had full mummification. You would be put inside that giant jug almost. And there's a very good example in the Petrie Museum. If you watch our video on the Petrie Museum, that's a very early pot burial. And here it doesn't have the actual skeleton, but very interesting piece. And here you see the figurines I was talking about a minute ago. You need someone to kill your animals for you, to row you to the afterlife. You've got pictures of family and relatives, and drawings on the wall of people farming and slaughtering animals. And you need that for the afterlife. You need sustenance. And here we enter. This is actually the entrance to the museum. And if you want sustenance 200 years ago, this is what you got. You got sumptuous, rich marble and gilding and statues, and almost a display of what the ancient world was in context with the modern day. So you have just beautiful detailing. It's a very inspiring room, and you actually walk into the museum. There is a step-free access which goes in by the cafe, or you go up the main steps, and when you come through you have this beautiful domed cupola, beautiful gilding, very detailed ceilings, and just a very beautiful, stunning room, really. Reminds me a lot of Chatsworth, not in terms of the room itself, but the inlaid stone tables, busts and statues of ancient Greece and modern notables, and just a very beautiful room. And again, keyed in, you see the Greek key design there, ties in a lot with the actual contents of the museum. And to me, this is what a museum 200 years ago looked like. It's a grand building celebrating its contents. Leaving that central entrance hall, you enter on the first floor the art collection. And really, although it's called the Fitzwilliam Museum, it reminds me a lot of, for example, the Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, where a smaller city than London has a combined museum and art gallery. And there's some very nice rural, some impressionist art, some modernist art, post-impressionist. And again, the rooms are beautifully detailed with plaster and marble. And some very, very pretty paintings here. There is one we'll get to in a minute, which is the only one I actually recognise without reading the inscription. But it reminds me a little bit of Tate Britain, which hopefully you watched the Tate Britain video where we went around. It's a collection of older sort of pre-impressionist, impressionist, post-impressionist, modernist, modern, and very modern. There was an exhibit here with paintings on the wall. It just basically, it said black, 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 written in black over each other, and they were placed within the context of the museum, which I'm sure we'll see one as we go around. There's a lovely picture of Dorset there and Cornwall. And there's quite a few rooms of painting here, so it's not an insubstantial art gallery. And there's some very pleasant pieces. I did like that one. It's a bust of Einstein. I think it's by Epstein. It's very interesting religious art if we just pop through here. Some triptychs and Renaissance art, church art. It reminds me a lot of the Sainsbury wing of the National Gallery, where you see the evolution of art through the Renaissance from the pre-Renaissance, before really the Renaissance kicked off proper, and there was quite a naivety to the structure of the art in that you couldn't necessarily, you knew it was Mary and baby, but you didn't necessarily, it didn't quite look like two people, like the angel appearing there. But as you move around, you see some very interesting pieces here, and some have been removed. Or is that the modern art? I don't quite understand. The one up there in the red and black is the exhibit I was talking about. You see the Mary with the Magi, the three kings coming. Here a beautiful triptych. So quite often above an altar or in a private chapel or in a church is the triptych, a picture in three parts which makes one composition, often separated by beautiful gilded woodwork. It comes from the Greek triptychos, which is three layered. And it's not actually normally the Trinity, but three fairly associated stories or parables or parts of the Bible. And you'll occasionally see it in churches today, but it's some very good examples in the Victoria and Albert Museum, probably my favourite museum in London, which we will be visiting in coming months. Quite a broad collection here. You've got those paintings out there, engravings here. It's quite like I think I said earlier, it's a broad and deep collection, and you have some pieces from this latest exhibition which is interspersed around the I Am a Man, and that links through to all the various pieces around the museum. Always old books, Very interesting pieces. If you like old books, go to the British Library in London. You see this section is less grandiose than some of the rest of the museum. It's a later edition, I believe, where it's decorative but not quite as much. Some lovely paintings here. There's St. George slaying the dragon. Various nude ladies that were very much the vogue in their day. Beautiful oil paintings throughout this section, along with some very good statuettes. I love this corner here. I was always a big fan of Canaletto, and there's some beautiful Canalettos here on the wall that I'm not facing with the camera. You can see Florence there. That's the bridge over next to the Uffizi, and Doge, or is it? No, sorry, it's the mouth of the Grand Canal, I think. And there you can see the Doge's Palace. Those two views, where you can see the inside and the outside of Doge's Palace. There's a level of detail to his paintings, particularly of Venice, which is almost photographic. I've always been quite fascinated by Canaletto. Along with Canaletto, there's a large collection of famous artists. There's a George Stubbs there, there's a Martin Beek, there was the Epstein earlier. Interesting collection, really. And again, a lot of religious art, family paintings, rural paintings. And there's another one of the modern art installation that's been placed around the museum during my visit. Some interesting Dutch art. This is interesting, an octagonal room with dark panels, and it's script written over in very blurry, and each one is a little bit more blurry. It's quite striking. I must admit, if you've watched my other videos, you probably realise I'm not a huge fan of modern art, certainly not the most modern, but it is quite impactful. Lovely terracotta piece here. More religious art here. Which certainly is an interesting collection. If you're going somewhere like Florence or Venice, before I went to the Victoria and Albert National Gallery to kind of gen up on it and just appreciate the art that I was going to see, and that it shows the sort of evolution of the art. And this is certainly a good museum for that. Here's one of the back entrance halls. Down a staircase, and we'll get to that in a minute. Before we do, there's just one last room of paintings. Some very beautiful paintings, some good examples. A lot of lesser artists or lesser well-known artists. There was one, I hope I captured it, about leaving home. It's a famous one, it's one I recognise. There's I think a Gainsborough, not one of the best known. Painting to the right is one they highlight quite a bit. It's a modern reimagining. So there was a black man who lived in Cambridge and had a family, married a local woman, and never had a portrait painted. So there's a sort of modern interpretation of the kind of Gainsborough style of family portrait. It's certainly in keeping. It's quite nice to see a modern family portrait in place with the large collections that you normally get of notables and families. Over here, There's a lovely painting of Prince William and his wife Catherine. I have to say, I don't want to be critical. She looks very good and is instantly recognisable. There's something not quite right about his forehead. Well, that was my take on it. I wouldn't have wanted that painting of me, whereas if I was Catherine, I'd be fine with it. Lovely room of pre-Raphaelite and very beautiful paintings of people as beauty, if that makes sense. I think after that, Impressionism became more painting with light, and modern paintings often look less like the object, they're more an interpretation of the object or person, whereas those pieces are very much an imagining, a poetic view of that person, almost an idealized beauty. And as you can see, there's a lot of rooms to the gallery. It's not a small museum. We have been through almost all of it. Now we're through to the final section of the museum, the arms and armoury. And there's a very good collection of swords, shields, flintlocks, rifles, and some lovely armour behind me, halberds and pikes. Beautifully engraved weapons there. Some very interesting Turkish weapons from the Ottomans. And here, medieval armour. Lovely, the collection here. It's a very good example. You can see them at Warwick Castle. There's a very good collection. And also, if you go to the Tower of London, there's a beautiful collection of armour. But certainly for a smaller town's collection, very interesting. And with that, our visit comes to an end. Certainly a museum I would recommend visiting. There's a very good shop, some beautiful items. I would say a little bit on the pricey side. Bargain shop, it certainly isn't. But very good museum quality material. Some books, pieces for the home, and really it's a very beautiful museum, quite mid-sized, small enough to consume it in half a day, big enough to have a comprehensive collection of both ancient history, porcelain and pottery, and definitely a good strong art gallery. So do watch out over coming weeks. We're visiting 4 other Cambridge museums, and they're certainly just as interesting. Not as big or famous as the Fitzwilliam, but all of them are well worth a visit, and all are very close to each other.